Hey guys, welcome back to Chris and Retro. Tonight's video is going to go down a different route initially, and I'm traveling for work this week, so I had to stop and grab a few things for my trip, and I looked across on the news rack, and I don't normally buy printed newspapers, but the headline grabbed me. We're spending an lot of time talking about Jeffrey Epstein and lists being exposed, but we've had something we've tolerated for years beyond the headline news of a individual like Jeffrey Epstein and who he might possibly be associated with. We walk past a pretty significant issue every single day, and I like to expose something I've seen in this article. And literally in about 15 minutes of digging, found some other interesting facts that you might want to do some research on your own. But that will get started. I'm going to draw some conclusions again. I'm only a few minutes into this here. I say a few minutes, probably it's been 35 minutes because I got there just before the store closed at 5 of. I came home and decided I want to do a story about this whole thing. So I looked over. We've got a local news called the Daily Messenger right here. And the headline says, sex abuse settlement totals $246 million. No, it's not about Jeffrey Epstein. No, it's not about Donald Trump or the Bidens or Obama or everything else. It's about one diocese, the Rochester Diocese, and nearly 500 people came forward with complaints of the Rochester Diocese. Now, before I get into some of the details in this article, I can tell you I was not surprised. There's jokes and cliche about this other stuff, and that's why I find it interesting. Now, I find all of it disgusting. Honestly, some of my concerns about Trump at this point have been absolutely related to that Epstein list and what seems to be kind of shifted aside as a non-subject matter. Well, if he's a non-subject matter, then how can anybody else be on there a non-subject matter? So my point is the hypocrisy there. Everybody involved in that list is disgusting to me, but we're spending so much time in that list that we're forgetting about something that's happening in every one of our local communities. Now, I grew up in a small town. We had one Catholic church, and in that Catholic church, there was all kinds of allegations about stuff going on in there. And in fact, one priest, I had a friend of mine who hasn't exactly lived the life that you'd want him to. He's, was in jail by, I think, 16 or 17 years old. He was in adult jail. I spent, I believe, 3 times in prison, all of them for violent offenses. But he found out news about this priest and found out where he lived and went and stole all his guns and stole his model train and stole his car and all that other stuff just to give the guy a hard time. But that church is part of the Rochester Diocese, and they're all named in this whole thing. So as I read the article, here's some details around it. $246 million were settled. That includes $120 million provided by insurance companies. This Continental Insurance waited to settle because they wanted to see what happened with the other insurance companies, so it took a while. This whole thing looks like it started. The first insurers agreed to pay in 2023. So this other insurer, after 2 insurance companies said we're going to pay these victims of assault from freaking priests, we're going to wait 2 years before we settle on ours, even though there's a precedent set with 2 other organizations. And it's not like the Catholic Church has not had, rumors of a quarantined approach that they take to this type of thing for decades, or probably since their inception, for all I know. I'm not an expert, and I pause for a minute. I'm not an expert in Catholicism or anything of the legalities around this, but what I do find it interesting is this is a known thing. This has been my whole life. There's been jokes about priests and what they do with kids. It's not a funny subject matter. It's that watch out for your priest. And when you actually find one that's not involved in that, they actually have a lot of following. That's how prevalent it is in the Catholic Church. That you find somebody that has, sworn celibacy is actually behaving that way. I think they have more following than others when you see it, but I think it's always just, you look, I know I do, and maybe it's just my personality, but some grown man's telling me he swore celibacy and many of their peers are acting this way, I'm thinking you just didn't get caught. That's my bias. That's not part of this article. That's just my version of it. But so interestingly enough, the diocese in September of 2019, according to this article, filed bankruptcy. And all this pressure came because of a Child Victims Act. So apparently, and I don't know the details of that act, because again, I'm 35 minutes into the story, I would guess it probably cut through some of the veil of what the Catholic Church has put up with these types of issues in the past. Now, if I turn to the second page, the second part of the article in here, it names who the bishop is. And so that was a big part for me. So his name's Salvador Montano. So I did a little dig on Salvatore Montano. Now in 2020, so 2019, they filed Chapter 11. 2020 puts out a letter about things being deeply concerning. So he's had all these allegations, 500 cases. Now keep in mind, Salvatore was appointed to the Rochester Diocese. He's been the head of it all since 2013. So think about the timeline. We got 500 cases. So parishioners within, in this diocese, it's 12 counties in Western New York. So 12 counties in Western New York have 500 kids or so. I don't know if they're all kids, but I assume many of them are. 500 allegations, to the point you have a massive lawsuit that settled for $246 million. And it took you from 2013 to 2020 to write a letter to say that you're deeply concerned. So we'll pause there for a minute. So I'm like, okay, well, that's a little odd to me. So I dug into Bishop Salvatore Montano. He was been a bishop, as I said, for the Rochester Diocese since 2013. He was ordained in December 17th, 2071. I'm sorry, 1971. So that means 7 months before I was born, roughly. He was ordained in Rome. And prior to Rochester, he was in Burlington. He was a bishop in Burlington. So in that case, let's take a look here at one thing I've got. Burlington is in Vermont, for those that don't know. And I will present, I'm going to share a few things here. I apologize for this not being smooth going here, but you're finding out what I'm finding out. So I just use the old Chat GPT just for fun. Here's a Burlington Diocese. This is, I guess, the foundational church in that. So this gives you a little history of what it is, so it shows it's a real place. We're going to go to the next thing that I've got. And I've not been a big Chat GPT person, but I found it very interesting for a lot of things in terms of some basic research. But this is one that I felt it was beneficial for a quick look. Now, there may be some things lacking substantiation in there, but I think when we start talking about directional concerns, things that you and I probably have heard about our whole life, I think it's fair to say that a lot of this information is interesting. And on top of it, because of the nature of this trail, and I'm no investigative reporter, how is it that I'm going down this path so easily? So it's obvious that there was a cover up here. So here's Burlington. I was just curious, are there sex assault lawsuits against the Roman Catholic Diocese of Burlington? And lo and behold, there are. Absolutely, yes. So there's a lawsuit with them as well. 2024, lo and behold, Chapter 11. Now, keep in mind, this bishop was in Rochester since 2013, but the diocese he left had the exact same allegations, did the exact same approach. They filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection to limit the amount of the lawsuit, is the only thing I can assume, if they're doing the exact same platform in Rochester, along the same timeline. So this clearly was a Catholic Church strategy for dealing with all these known lawsuits. So for my area, 500 came forward. However, many else didn't. 500 came forward. In October 24th, 2024, they filed for bankruptcy. At that time, they faced over 30 lawsuits following a 2019 repeal of the statute of limitations. So statute of limitations was their first go. Keep in mind, none of this is the church saying this is morally reprehensible and we're getting rid of anybody associated with it. No, instead they protected it, knowing for sure this behavior is going on. And not only that, they were fighting it with statute of limitations, I would assume, saying, oh, it's timed out. It doesn't matter that a kid was hurt by a priest. It only matters that the statute of limitations came out. That's not a church. This is a business. The Catholic churches had all kinds of stuff that I obviously do not co-sign religion. This one I absolutely do not co-sign because it has nothing to do with God. This stuff right here, it just makes me so angry. They'd already had 67 prior cases since 2006. Now keep in mind, that's around 34 million. And again, the timeline. When did this guy, Bishop Montano, come over to Rochester? 2013. So in 2006, all this stuff was going on and there were lawsuits and they headed down the road with the exact same path. So another 118 claims. They're now handing 118 claims. Rochester has 500. It's far less, but it's still substantial. Again, these are people that come forward. You can look into this more for yourself, but I want to give a highlight of what I've seen so far. So we're going to get into the last piece of information. I'm going to make some comments. I've obviously made some comments. What I'm talking about. I'm going to make some more comments because I just can't stop. So I was curious. Okay, so if we know that this Matano gentleman, loosely saying, is involved in these two cases, or these two substantial lawsuits. I asked, was there any allegations against Matano? There was no substantiated sexual abuse allegations against, not substantiated under any of the circumstances. I'd probably say, okay, when you're looking at 500 here, 118 there, and nothing came towards him, in any other circumstance, I'd say, then he's probably okay. My problem is that the way he's managing this entire process is insulation. So if he's going to insulate an entire organization, of course he'd insulate himself. He's been associated directly as a leader in two massive lawsuits that caused Chapter 11 filings in two separate dioceses, and yet he's still being in control and not. So he's lived through all this stuff in Burlington that was going on in 2006. He lived through all that stuff in 2013, and only in 2020, after they filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2019, did he write a letter saying this is awful. He's hiding it until he couldn't hide it anymore. That's all there is to it. So this, I would pause on whether this is accurate or not. What it is accurate on is that there have been no allegations that have been substantiated. It didn't say there was no allegations, but what there was asset shielding trusts. So in 2006, when that other diocese had the first round of complaints coming in, when he was part of it, they said that Bishop of Burlington, we just talked about, Matrano, placed roughly 128 parish properties into separate charitable trusts. So he, before Chapter 11 filing in 2019, he absolutely was part of that whole financial move, because now they're not part of the Catholic Church and can't be part of a named lawsuit. So in 2006, he saw the storm coming and started shuffling assets around. He was widely criticized by victim advocacy groups as an attempt to protect diocese and parish assets from being used in clergy abuse settlements. So again, protecting the money of the Catholic Church versus protecting the people that are parishioners there and the children. Refusal to disclose predator priests. I've already talked about this. Advocates, including SNAP, and I'm not sure what SNAP is, accused Matano of delaying public listings or proper oversight of clergy credibly, accused of abuse during his, so he was accused, it's talking about the clergy that was accused of abuse during his tenure in Vermont. So it wasn't him, it was the clergy that was, and he didn't properly disclose it. And on top of it, he not properly disclose it, he resisted mandatory training and transparency measures required by the U.S. Bishop Charter. So not only did he not disclose it, they knew he wasn't disclosing it, mandated training, at least training, which is really a slap on the wrist, and he wouldn't even do that. That's how hell-bent he was on this, and to make sure that he didn't look like he was admitting any wrong. If you don't admit it at all, then you're not wrong, right? Handling abuse in Rochester, the one we're just talking about. After New York's Child Victims Act opened up 1 year window in August 2019 for the survivors to file decade-old claims. So that's why the statute of limitations things apparently went away. So in August of 2019, they had that go. By September of 2019, they filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy. He says that it was a very difficult and painful decision, but maintained it was needed to equitably compensate victims while preserving diocese operations. Liar. They filed Chapter 11 so that there was nothing there to file for. He's already shown that he moves properties to other ownership, so there's not assets. He's not looking out for victims at all. The proposed settlement agreement in late 2022 is $55 million for approximately $475 for survivors. Evidently, he followed a formal apology to the Letter of the Faithful, describing abuse and ensuing process as tragic and painful. Again, just to cover up because it's obviously exposed. And this, what was considered a $55 million lawsuit, became a $246 million lawsuit of 500 survivors. So additional 25 came from the time that this was reported in the CatholicNewsAndWorld.com. And I'm sure that they're completely non-biased. And then the removal of priests from ministry. This was a question I asked. Well, how many people lost their job over this? In 2019, so this is just December 2019, just before they had to file bankruptcy from the volume of stuff that comes in. Keep in mind, again, he was ahead of one diocese that had to file Chapter 11 eventually under severe scrutiny for moving assets to other nonprofit trusts, and all this other shell game that he was avoiding. In 2018, before these guys filed Chapter 11, he knew all about this stuff. He's the head of both organizations through what, in between the two, is roughly 620 known survivors of abuse. And only 2 were removed. 2 priests in the Diocese of Rochester were removed from public ministry following independent investigations and review board recommendations. As I understand, the Catholic Church does their own investigations too. That's the part that's always been a shell game as well. So, where am I at with all this? Well, obviously frustrated. And on top of it, I think that we're spending way too much time. Well, we are not spending way too much time. That's cliche. I think that we should be continually demanding Epstein lists. But more importantly, in our own communities, we should ask for people that are in trusted advisory roles if from something as serious as a spiritual component, not to be used it for their own selfish gain. And clearly, this bishop has decided to make the finances of the Catholic Church more important than the victims that have been perpetrated crimes against them by the leadership of each one of these churches. It's baffling to me that that's the position that anybody that's supposedly a God-run organization would ever take. But maybe it goes back to the fact that you can't talk to God unless you go through your priest. And what if your priest is doing something to you that he's not supposed to do? Then how do you get a hold of God? It's nuts to me. Before you get crazy about an Epstein list that we really don't have the access to, you can go crazy about the fact that your local Catholic church might be touching your kid. If that's the case, do something about it. Don't let it go from this stuff. This is 2006. Takes them to 2020 to do a letter talking about how troubling it is. Leader of 2 organizations in 2 separate states with massive amounts of victims that could come forward. A change in law that allowed the victims to claim within a 12-month period if they long passed the statute of limitations. I mean, there was all kinds of dispensation to try to bring these people forward, and they still weren't. I was talking to Sam about this, and she's like, I said it's grooming, because she was kind of like, man, why wouldn't more people come forward? Well, it's grooming. I mean, you think about how this had to have gone down. How confusing does that have to be for a young person? This person is supposed to be respected. This person's probably respected by your parents and grandparents and everything else. And the loftiest position, if you follow the Catholic religion on earth in the religious construct, as I understand it. I've never been Catholic. I'm always around it seems like. All this hoopla about the Epstein list and all this hoopla about our current president, everybody caring about all these victims and everything else that they're talking about that they supposedly have this noble intent over. Every one of you has got a Catholic church probably within a stone's throw of your freaking house. And who's to say what's going on in there? Because evidently 500 people were brave enough to come forward in Rochester, and it took years for them to get any financial compensation. And to this point, the apologies and the way the church has handled itself, based on my brief look into it and what I've seen historically, at least in our area, it's still a cover-up. There's nothing here that's naming names and firing priests. If you were accused of this and it was settled in court as a massive win and lawsuit, we're talking, they thought it was $55 million in 2019. It turned into $246 million with only 25 more victims coming forward. I don't know what else has to say. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And how is it that only 2 priests were let go? Hopefully, and I don't have evidence to support it in this short a time, hopefully more were. But all I know right now is 2. And that certainly isn't anywhere near to balance the impact that had been caused here to our local community, and probably in yours as well. Look in your local church. ChatGPT was a useful resource for me. It comes with all the reference sites and everything else to it. There might be another source that you want to use. But before you go diving into some religious program in your area, take a look at what they're getting involved in. And the Catholic Church clearly is just as big a cover-up as Bishop Epstein. Guys, I'm not against God at all. And so I don't want this to come across as a bash on God and what he has for our lives. This is why I'm not supportive of religion and this construct of it, because it's business in a lot of cases, and sometimes just self-serving ego. In this case, it seems like both. Watch your kids back, no matter where they are. This is a crappy world, no doubt about it. And Epstein probably isn't affecting your kids as much as maybe your local priest. Guys, between now and the next time we talk, I'm going to do everything I can to stay out of trouble, and I hope you do too.